Today on an all-new Dr. Phil. Often clues to who a killer is can be found in their childhood. He was overweight, bullied. He was asking women, "Do you live alone?"
Was the suspect in contact with the BTK serial killer?
We know that Kohberger studied my dad.
Nowhere in there do they say, "We know our son and we know he didn't do this." Is there any among you four that do not believe that this was premeditated? Does everybody agree that this was something that he worked on and had in his mind? If he is in fact the killer here, and we have to say alleged because he is pleading innocent here and saying he didn't do this. So if he is the one, does anybody think that this was impulse, or does everybody think that this was premeditated?
Even the timing of it, Dr. Phil, if in fact suspect Kohberger is the killer, it was right before he was changing the plates on his car. We know that his license plates were expiring November 30. The murders happened on November 13th. And then he goes in, if in fact he committed these murders, on November 18th, he gets new plates. The difference is that in PA, you don't have plates in the front and the back of the car. You only have it in the back of the car. Once you change it to Washington plates, you have plates on both the front and the back of the car. So if you want to commit these crimes surreptitiously, hide the identity of who the owner of the car is. And you do that more efficiently if you don't have a license plate staring at the security cameras.
And I said, I don't believe in coincidences. I just don't. I'm sorry. I've been at this too long to believe in coincidence. And if the roommate gave an accurate description of what she saw, if this was impulse, it would just be blind luck that he was in all black. And
with a mask.
With a mask. And that's just the night they impulse decide to hack 4 people to death.
I think the evidence that we have and that we know of that was shown in the affidavit shows proof that anybody who wants to think that this was just not premeditated, then they're not looking at the totality of the evidence. And that's always very important if you're gonna look at something like this, is to look at the totality of the circumstances. The fact that he was there so many times before and he doesn't live in that neighborhood. And then that night, the vehicle that is the exact description of the vehicle that he drives was in that neighborhood and made 4 passes by that home at the same time he turned his phone off and then turned it back on. It just shows that he was there, he was thinking about this, working it out, working it up, and even that night, he waited until the house shut down. Right, so even that shows that it wasn't just that he was passing by and he jumped out and went into the house. He literally drove by numerous times until the house shut down, and even after the DoorDash, he went in.
I think the house in and of itself also shows that it was premeditated. Whomever perpetrated the quadruple homicide had to know the layout of the house. Yes. It is a weird house. It has 3 floors. There's bedrooms scattered on different floors. There's staircases in odd places. There's a slider on the back. The 2nd floor is the ground level on the back. It's a weird house. And based on what the surviving roommate told police, he wasn't banging around, he wasn't knocking things over, he wasn't causing a ruckus. It sounded like the killer knew exactly where they were going, and they knew exactly where they were going when they left.
What I'm hoping for here is that they have checked out all of the closet areas. Any place someone could sequester themselves, if a perpetrator was of a mind and that door was chronically open, they could have gone into that location and nested essentially for periods of time. And there are people that have certain sexual proclivities that fall into this particular typology where, let's put it plainly, they're panty sniffers. And they'll go into these areas, they'll collect items, they'll observe. And forensically, one of the things that would be very fascinating here is to see if there is any DNA that might be connected to this individual that's contained in these sequestered areas, if it's touch DNA or if it's generated from some bodily fluid that's left behind. I think that would be important.
Right, and you're bringing up a great point there, because how would he know the house?
Yeah. Right.
And the way he would know the house, I don't think he is someone that would be invited to the house.
But it was a party house, Dr. Phil. He could have slipped in.
Well, that's what I mean. He wouldn't necessarily have been invited by one of the 4 roommates, but he could have come in during a party. He could have slipped in. That, as you say, that door is chronically open. He could have come and gone when they weren't there. He could have been in one of those closets, nesting, slipping in, slipping out without committing another crime. Guys, let's talk about this some, because we know when we go back and look at the profiles of killers, whether it's school shooters, whether it's serial killers, mass shooters, we do know that these are people that did not have happy childhoods typically, that sometime in their early upbringing, there was a childhood trauma. We also know that they tend to feel marginalized, and that unresolved childhood trauma comes to a crisis point sometime in their adult life. We don't know necessarily what triggers it. We don't know what brings it about, but it's almost always there. It's almost always a path to violence in some way. And here, when you look at what happened with him, he was overweight, he was mocked and rejected and bullied, and then he became a bully. He started to look for positions of authority. He wanted to be a police intern. He wanted to do the things they were just talking about there with getting into military, that sort of thing, where he's in a position of authority to get a license for force. I'm not surprised to hear that background. What do you think?
No, I'm not. Doc, I think this pathology begins way in the past, and to bring it back to forensics, that's why I think that it's very important, and I can only urge in the strongest terms that based upon this final thing that he's involved in here, this horrific act, I think that it would be wise for the authorities in Pennsylvania to look anywhere that this guy's been domiciled, wherever he hung his hat, whether it was in his parents' home near the Poconos, whether it was at DeSales when he was doing his undergraduate and his master's degree. Because if there was anything going on along that continuum, if there's any way that they can correlate cases that are back there in the past, what's the harm? What's the harm in going back and looking at these things to see if there's some kind of aberrant behavior back there, something's happened?
We do know that the report from the bar near his home reported that he was asked to not come into the bar anymore because he was going up to women and asking them if they lived alone.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not a real icebreaker.
No, it was a real creep factor. A lot of those women were very concerned.
It says something that he did it enough times that the wait staff went to the owner and said something, and he had it on
Well,
file.
what also it says is that he's not reading the room enough to know
Yeah.
this
100%
is
right.
not a way to start a conversation with a woman.
Yeah.
Which again speaks to the awkwardness and the narcissism. You're not reading the room when you walk up to an attractive young woman and ask her if she lives alone, and the reaction is such that they ask you to stop coming to the bar.
Right.
You should, if you are dialed in at all, if you are reading the reactions, you would say, that's not working.
Right.
I need to say, can I buy you a drink? Or, what do you like to do? Or anything besides, do you live alone?
And he was apparently flabbergasted when the owner of the bar told him, you can't do this anymore.
And he's not reading that, which tells you something about him.
Right.
Which, as you say, you should look everywhere this guy has been.
Everywhere.
Because you're going to find something back there that's going to be a problem. This BTK killer's daughter, Carey Rawson, made a Twitter post on the possible connection between her father and suspect Bryan, which went viral. She says she can also relate to what the suspect's family must be going through. Now, joining us virtually is Carey Rawson. Kerri, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
This is something that really caught your attention. Tell us why.
Kohberger studied under Dr. Catherine Ramsland at DeSales University for his undergrad and master's in criminology. That came out right after his arrest. And Dr. Ramsland has had a many years relationship academically and personally through correspondence and phone calls with my father, Dennis Rader, otherwise known as BTK.
Right. Tell people what BTK stands for.
Bind, torture, and kill.
Mhm. And what similarities do you see between your father and Bryan?
Bryan turned 28 right after his first murders. My dad was 28 for his first, the part of the Otero family. They both murdered 4. My dad preferred to enter at night. There was one case down the street from me where he waited in a neighbor's closet. I do believe Kohberger studied my dad. I mean, we know that Kohberger studied my dad in academic classes. I guess my question is, did he have a further interest in my dad outside of classes or higher influence through Dr. Ramsland's teachings? Because she emphasizes a class, at least one class on my father.
Right. And so they were both 28, and both of them killed 4 people. If Bryan, in fact, is the killer here, he's pled innocent, but allegedly. And as you say, he may have nested in a closet there, and you know that's something that your father did. And I know that this was an incredible shock to your family to find out what you found out about what your father was doing. What do you think his family is going through at this point?
Just utter hell and shock. But the family, as far as we know, is innocent here. So your initial reactions is shock and denial.
The problem that healthy people have is that behavior is on a continuum. Our consciousness is on a continuum. And it goes from this end of the continuum, which is happiness and joy and purity, all the way to the dark side, which is just pure evil. And the problem is, everybody that lives in this end of the continuum cannot fathom what happens in this end of the continuum. So it's hard to foresee it. It's hard to think about it. It's hard to conceptualize it because your mind doesn't go there. Your heart doesn't go there. You can't conceive of stalking someone and then going around with this kind of a horrific weapon and going into someone's house and in their sleep getting on top of them and hacking them to death. But the fact of the matter is, and I've been in this profession almost 50 years, those people exist. Yeah. They are in this world and they are among us. There are people that get up and go out into the world every day and they're not happy till they've inflicted pain on someone. And we all need to be aware that those people are out there. And I'm not saying you should be paranoid. I'm not saying you should stay at home. I'm not saying you should keep your children at home. But we do need to be aware that there are people that are walking around in this world. They might be working with you. They might be standing next to you in the line at the grocery store. They're certainly out at night. And, sometimes I see people getting lippy or mouthy or road rage or whatever. You just don't know. You just don't know who's in that car that you're honking at. You don't know who you're yelling at. You don't know what they got in their pocket. You don't know what they got under their seat. You don't know who you're dealing with. I'm just saying we just need to be aware that there is that dark element out there.
Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.